Hello, Star Trek fans, and welcome to the Rebinge Deep Space Nine podcast. My name is Kim.
And my name is James.
And we're watching Star Trek Deep Space Nine from the beginning, one episode at a time. Welcome back to the podcast. Today we are on Season 6, Episode 20, His Way. This episode aired April 22nd, 1998. Before we talk about this one, anything to say about last week's episode, which was In the Pale Moonlight?
No, it was a perfect episode. That was such a good episode. I so enjoyed that. Just absolutely amazing acting and writing all the way down. I am kind of gushing about the episode. It is one of my favorites.
Yeah, it's a great episode, and I think I read it's a lot of people's favorite, so I get it. I doubt that this particular episode is anybody's favorite, but I don't know. People are strange.
Yes. Wasn't that a song?
Yes. Well, should we get started?
I suppose we probably should.
Yeah, and because we're trying to do 2 episodes over the weekend, I've watched the next one, and the whiplash continues.
Yes. We can talk about that in the wrap-up.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, so let's get underway. We open on an outside shot of the station and immediately go into what appears to be a Vegas club in the 1960s. There's a lounge singer who, based on the curtains behind him, is called Vic Fontaine, and he's singing Somebody to Love. The usual crew are all hanging around at the bar watching, and Odo, oddly, seems to be actually jamming to the music and enjoying himself. Kira is watching this in the background and smiling and kind of laughing.
Yep, she thinks it's cute.
It was sort of interesting for Odo to see him basically kind of jamming to the music.
Meanwhile, Worf is complaining.
Bashir is quite excited about this, saying, "Isn't he terrific?" But Worf, the walking frown, says, "I prefer Klingon opera." That's completely in character with what you would expect for Worf.
It's such a stick in the mud. It's like, this is just a single event. You don't have to commit to it as a genre you love. You can just say, oh yeah, this is nice. No, I have to tell you that Klingon opera is better.
It tracks. I would expect Worf to also say something like, there were no glorious victories in that song. Nobody died.
Yeah, they're just cute little tunes.
Bashir tells them that this is no ordinary hologram, and he'll introduce them.
I do like that Kira's reaction here is, to a hologram?
Yes. So he meets the crew and calls himself a light bulb. And much to everyone's surprise, he actually knows that he's a hologram. He also demonstrates that he seems to have a lot of knowledge about people. He picks up on Dax and Worf being married, Miles is missing his wife, and for Kira and Odo, he starts saying something and then says, forget I brought it up. Vic describes himself as a student of the human heart. I assume that the master program that's running Vic and things is just like getting updates from space Facebook, so knows that they're married. And
knows their relationship status.
Yeah, and is like trawling the database, looking to see, who Miles is, etc. Maybe I'm just more cynical that in this day and age, there's so much data mining that a program knowing something isn't particularly impressive.
Yeah, because they all seem shocked.
Yeah.
But yeah, it doesn't seem that shocking.
Maybe in the future with the Federation and Starfleet, they have privacy laws.
I think we have established they do not, as we've watched Bashir give private medical information to people.
Here, let me email you their medical file.
Yeah.
Well, they all seem suitably impressed, and as they're leaving, Vic reminds them that this is a class joint, and the crew needs to dress up next time.
Ugh.
They look like a trapeze act.
Yeah, women have to wear dresses. Screw you, Vic.
Back in Quark's bar, we learn that Kira is going to Bajor to visit Shakar, and when asked it's for business and pleasure, she avoids answering.
Well, because Dax wasn't even supposed to tell anybody that it was happening, and she just revealed it in front of the whole group.
You don't tell Dax things. I think that's an important rule that everybody should have figured out by now.
Yeah, that's just not a good friend thing to do. It's disappointing.
Julian also tells Miles that he was asking Vic for advice about dating because he's programmed to know things about life, love, and women. Miles does deliver a fantastic zinger at this point, telling Julian, those are 3 things you know nothing about. When Julian protests, saying that's a bit unfair, Miles replies, then why are you asking advice from a light bulb?
Yeah, That's a good question. And also, Julian says here he's dating some ensign. And I went to look up the name of the person that he married in Children of Time, wondering if it was the same person. But it wasn't. It was a different name.
Oh, interesting.
But it seems risky for people to date others in the workplace, or at least in Starfleet, who have a lower ranking than them.
That's an interesting point.
Yeah, I don't like it.
Yeah, that could be a dangerous power dynamic.
Yes.
Plus, why wouldn't you want to date the person that, in an alternative timeline, you end up with?
Maybe she doesn't like him. She has more options.
Oh, he was bottom of the barrel.
Yeah, she has more options.
Oh, man. So you're saying that whole storyline was based on he'll do.
Yeah.
Wow. That's dark.
I think we all know Julian isn't my favorite.
Well, during this whole conversation, Odo appears to be listening and looks over at the Ferengi who's putting away the hologram data rod. And we go into the credits.
Yep.
Now, quick observation here.
Mm-hmm.
I assume when Julian says that Vic is programmed to understand women, it means that he's programmed with the social norms expected of women in the early 1960s.
Of the 1960s, yeah.
Yeah.
That seems to be the case because he's telling women they have to wear dresses and men they have to wear suits. Yeah, and he uses a lot of, I don't know, are they derogatory, the terms to describe, or the terms to talk to women? Like he calls them broads and things like that. It's not impressive. I don't think we should look to the past to how to treat women. We shouldn't always look to the future if this is it either, but my point is valid.
Maybe part of it is, maybe they're looking at these time periods with oddly rose-tinted glasses. If you'd reached a point where there really was equality in everything from race to gender to species to whatever, that you would look at these times differently and you wouldn't have the same reactions. You're like, oh, look, they're being silly, or isn't that funny, sort of thing. I don't know whether that's true or would be valid, or whether you would take a reaction of looking at the way they behave and going, wow, that's bad.
Yeah, how ridiculous.
So I wouldn't think you would want to emulate it.
And the fact that Bashir has seen it because he traveled back in time in past tense. So he's aware the past isn't perfect and rosy, but they've got him as this person who wants to be James Bond and for some reason wants to do it in the past. So I don't know. At the same time, they've shown him to prefer the kind of woman that women were expected to be from that time period. You know, if you look back to that episode, the stupid one with Rumpelstiltskin, where there were two versions of Dax.
Yeah.
And one was the version that he saw or that he somehow wanted Dax to be.
Yeah.
She did whatever he wanted. She had no ambitions of her own. And so that sort of fit into this.
You're right.
So that's a terrible thing to say about Bashir, but this is the only evidence I have.
That if you go into his psyche, that's really what he wants.
Yeah.
Interesting.
But he should be more aware of mistreatment because of who you are based on the augment stuff that he's had to hide his whole life. Now it's all out in the open, but still he had to hide it. And I'm sure that it comes up a lot and there are people who still look down on him. So he should have some understanding of what this is like.
Yeah.
It's impossible, really, to believe that they wouldn't recognize that going back in time and emulating the treatment of people would be a good idea.
Yeah. And to jump back to your point earlier, for someone like Julian, who also experienced what the past was like in past tense, where they were being awful to people based on social status and employment,
right,
regardless of anything else, you would think you wouldn't want to look at the past and go, yeah, that was a rosy time, wasn't it?
Yeah. So it's all pretty cloudy, I would say.
I could see you wanting to experience it as an edited version. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm. Oh, I can see wanting to be a part of it or see it or live in it as a story. I can see that. But this idea that you would somehow take advice from someone from that time period of how to treat others, that's the part that I take issue with.
Right. It is kind of odd. Anyway, back to the story. In his office, Odo appears to be discussing his dating life with Quark, which is very odd in the first place.
Well, Quark is the only one who knows he's in love with Kira, right?
That's true.
Apart from Kira.
Quark actually gives him some surprisingly good advice here.
I thought so too.
Quark goes on to point out that it's been over a year since Kira broke up with Shakar, and in all that time, Odo has not approached her.
Yeah.
Quark also correctly points out that Odo is not the most lovable person in the galaxy, or the sector, or the station, or even in this room.
I have to say, I really did enjoy this scene. I thought that was a pretty good conversation.
Yeah, I thought it was surprisingly on point.
Agreed.
It was also a great line delivery from Quark. As he leaves, Quark tells Odo, "You need to make up your mind." And then Odo asks him for a favor about Julian's holosuite program.
Mm-hmm.
Back to the bar, and it's late. And Julian comes in as he can't sleep. He asks to use the program, and Quark makes an excuse that, well, all the holosuites are busy, and they're going to be busy for the rest of the night.
Yeah.
Julian seems disappointed and says he's going to go and bother Miles.
Yep.
And at 9:45 in the episode, we get to see Morn sitting in his favorite chair. I think we should go back to Morn spotting.
Okay.
We go back into the holosuite, where Vic is regaling Odo with stories about Vegas in the 50s.
Ugh.
Vic begins giving Odo some advice about how he acts so stiff, at one point telling Odo, "Cool is one thing, but you're frozen solid."
Yeah, this scene was not good. First of all, he prattles on for a long time with his stories about Vegas in the 60s. It's so boring. And Odo is bored as well, which is sort of funny. But then he calls Kira a broad, and I'm already out the window with that one. It's like, oh, yeah. Not a great way to talk about women or to be the person giving advice to someone. No.
Moving on, he tells Odo he needs to show his emotions and dress better.
Mm-hmm.
To which Odo transforms into a tuxedo. Very useful ability.
The tux was maybe the best part of the episode.
Yeah.
He looked pretty good.
He talks Odo into playing the piano for the band. And there's a wonderful bit where Odo jumps as the piano starts playing by itself. And he tells Odo, "You've got to sell it." Vic starts singing one of his numbers, and eventually Odo starts getting into it, pretending to play, and perhaps even more shockingly, he appears to be enjoying it. This holoprogram does actually seem to be pretty good at getting Odo out of his shell a little.
As long as only holograms are watching.
That's true.
Although I didn't quite understand the fake piano playing. I mean, what was he actually doing?
I think he was just trying to get Odo to relax, to, have fun, to pretend to be something else, to take part in this fantasy.
Yeah, because fooling women is a great way to get a date.
Oh, no, I think it wasn't that. I think it was more of a case of Odo is very rigid. And terrible.
But it was that. That's what the whole episode was. Oh, I'm so sorry.
In this scene, I think he's trying to get Odo to relax and actually have fun. It's the sort of Odo being almost too stiff, why would you do that? Why would you have fun doing that? And him trying to show Odo, look, you can play this part in this holo game. And look, it's kind of fun.
No, I actually don't have any problem with him trying to tell him he needs to loosen up.
Yeah.
And there is a part, I can't remember if it's here or if it's later, when he says something about having fun, and Odo's like, what does having fun have to do with Major Kira?
Right.
So, I don't have a problem with that. It's more about the treatment of women specifically.
Yeah. Well, because at the end of the set, there's a lot of applause from the holograms, and Odo actually seems to have enjoyed it.
Yeah.
And he even does like jazz hands and says, cool.
Oh, yeah.
Which was
That's
very
right.
funny. So after the show, Vic is trying to help Odo relax and not be so rigid. There's a knock at the door, and then two very well-dressed women come in, who I assume are two of Vic Fontaine's groupies. And Vic has planned that they're going to hit the shows in Vegas, which also includes taking Odo along. We come back to the real world, and in Sisko's office, Odo is giving Sisko a report. And while he's waiting, Odo begins absent-mindedly humming a tune and eventually singing it. Sisko starts joining in by keeping time with finger snaps, and Odo seems very happy.
Sisko has such a beautiful voice.
And then the two of them start singing and jamming to the same song. It was very funny.
This was actually quite adorable, I thought.
Yeah.
And I feel like this is the point where Odo has really missed an opportunity here. He's asking the wrong people for advice. The person to ask is the guy sitting in front of you right now, the guy who loves love. And the guy who you can trust. You know
Yes.
he won't tell anybody.
Oh, yeah.
You can't ask Dax or, any of the crew because they're all going to gossip with each other.
Oh,
But
right.
Cisco is the guy that you could trust.
Well, Dax comes up right now because in the turbo lift, Bashir and Dax are gossiping about Kira, who's spending 2 more days on Bajor.
Yep.
This is going to be a huge part of the next episode of Inappropriate Conversations with Jadzia Dax, Dax's podcast.
Yeah.
I mean, we've not heard from the podcast lately because, the war and everything else that's going on. But I'm wondering what episode number she's up to now.
Probably as many as we've done, like 150.
Oh, yeah, I think so.
But Dax also says something here about Odo to Julian. And again, she's being a bad friend. She's not keeping stuff to herself.
Right.
Julian is clueless, but still.
Quark is again giving Odo the holoprogram, and we see he's back to playing the piano. Vic notices Odo is still a little down and introduces him to a new singer called Lola Crystal, who starts singing Give Me Fever. And we see it's Kira, or at least a hologram of her.
No, Nana visitor singing. Now you've got something.
Oh, yeah. She really got into that.
Yeah, she is good.
Yeah.
I enjoyed that.
After the show, Odo is awkwardly talking to Lola, the holo Kira, and eventually tells Vic that this isn't working. You programmed her to find me irresistible.
Honestly, this is creepy, right? It's one thing if you use it to sort of practice asking them a question or getting the courage to say something, almost like you're talking into a mirror.
Right.
But this is different. Yeah, he's programmed her to sort of fawn all over him, and it's weird. And also not know who she is, and it's creepy.
Well, Vic isn't too pleased and says, do you know how hard it was for me to get a holo image of Major Kira? Which is interesting, because I know there's one floating around with Quark's head.
I like, though, that he says that he got it out of Bashir's program and that it took him a long time to get rid of the Russian accent. That was actually quite funny.
That was funny, yes. Lower Decks also makes a reference to Kira and the Quark's head hologram.
But again, here in this scene, he calls the fake Kira sweetheart, and this is not setting a good example for Odo. This is my whole problem in this episode.
Odo tries explaining to Vic that it's one thing in the holosuite when he sees Kira, but when he sees the real one, he'll freeze up again.
Yep.
Odo seems to just get annoyed with this whole thing and eventually leaves telling Vic he's tired of discussing his feelings with a hologram.
There's some silly music in this episode, too, in between some of the scenes that makes it seem like it's an episode of The Love Boat or something.
Oh, dear.
Such a dopey episode in so many ways.
I understand, though. He's using a lot of phrases that would probably get a few HR complaints if you used them in the modern workplace.
And as I have stated before on this podcast, when any kind of harassment coming at a person in the workplace counts as harassment, even if it's from a vendor or a customer or someone who doesn't work there, like a hologram. It's all the same. I'm sure that's written into the future training.
Back onto the promenade, and Kira has returned. She also seems in very good spirits, so somebody must have died, or about to die, and she runs into Odo, who basically says hi and then makes an excuse and runs off quickly. This does leave Kira somewhat slightly confused about what's going on. Kira is now meditating, surrounded by candles, and we see Vic come into the holosuite, who says, "Hey, dollface."
Oh, my notes say, "Hey, dollface." No. No.
Anyway, a surprised Kira asks, "How did you get in here?" Because she's in a holosuite. And Vic replies, "I'm performing for Dax and Worf next door. I'm between sets."
And between holosuites, apparently.
Yes.
It's like this is backstage.
Yeah, exactly. I thought that was actually kind of funny. An annoyed Kira asks, "What do you want?" And he tells her that he wants to talk to her about Odo. And he's nuts about her. She's very surprised by saying, "Odo's spending time in a holosuite?" Vic tells her that she doesn't know him as well as she thinks she does, which clearly seems to be true. Eventually, he tells her that he needs her to come to the holosuite tonight because Odo wants to have dinner with her. And Vic is asking for him. Kira relents, saying, "Well, I better say yes." She seems very strangely amused by this whole thing.
She does. I have two things. One, first of all, he calls her cranky after he interrupts her meditation. That's okay.
Yeah.
Okay, dude, back off. And then secondly, I would find it surprising that she wouldn't then go to Odo.
Right.
And mention it to him, that instead she would just turn up at this date set by a hologram.
Odo, a holoprogram just asked me out on a date for you.
Yeah.
Are we in high school? Is this a High School
Because
Musical thing?
It might be a glitch. It might be a hologram of Odo and not the real Odo. Why would she just assume that everything was above board? There are a lot of holes.
It seems very juvenile is the only way to describe it.
It's the Love Boat. It's an episode of the Love Boat.
Yeah. They should have used more goofy music in here because then we would be able to pick up on it was the Love Boat episode.
Yes.
Odo's now in his office reading reports, and he's very surprised when he gets a call from Vic on his comm line.
Yeah, that was funny.
Vic tells Odo he must come to the holosuite as he's completely overhauled the Lola program. She's now exactly like Kira.
Mm-hmm.
Hashtag not creepy at all.
Uh-huh.
When Odo asks how, Vic makes an excuse telling him he doesn't have time, just be there.
I liked here when Vic says that Odo has to come at 9 o'clock, and then he says, that's 2100 to you. And Odo says, I know.
Yeah.
I just thought that was funny. Because someone has to do that for me. They have to translate numbers for me, but it's the other direction.
Into the holosuite we go, and Odo is meeting with Kira and tells her she looks lovely. She tells him he does too. Vic seats them for dinner and tells them he will be their server for the evening. Kira asks Odo, don't you feel a little silly being here in the holosuite? And she goes on to tell Odo that she's a little nervous, which surprises him, and she explains it is a first date. They converse a little, and she tells Odo about the only thing you enjoy is your work. He seems a little surprised she knows this, and she tells him, well, you told me yourself. Odo, of course, is thinking that she's just a programmed hologram by Vic. Odo goes on and tells her that he does enjoy his work, and that he's used it as an excuse to avoid the rest of his life. Kira replies, she knows the feeling.
Yeah, I think that's a really good line, actually.
Yeah, I would agree.
Yeah. I appreciated some things in the scene. Not the description of the 1960s dinner that ends with Cherry's Jubilee. That sounds revolting. But I liked when Odo, when he wasn't afraid.
Yes.
And he thought Kira was not really Kira. He was then, in that moment, he was very focused on her. He was able to be what he wants to be.
Yes.
I did appreciate that. I thought it was quite sweet, and he wasn't self-conscious. So I can see the value of it in that moment.
Right. Well, Vic starts up a musical number, and they begin to dance. Kira tells Odo, I had no idea you could dance. And she laughs, saying, I can't believe we're having our first date in a holosuite. Eventually, Odo asks Vic to tell Kira she's a hologram, and Vic says, no, you've been dancing with the real McCoy.
Yeah, the dancing scene, I quite liked it, actually. It was heartbreaking and sweet at the same time because you knew the spell was going to be broken at some point. It didn't last very long.
Now the spell's broken, they both turn to face Vic saying, you tricked me. Yeah. Vic says, I brought you two lovebirds together. I thought that was the whole idea. Odo seems to get all flummoxed and says, Kira, Nerys, and finally Major, and then quickly leaves the holosuite.
And then he runs away.
Yeah.
It's so sad that he ran away because he was killing it on that date.
Yeah, I think he was.
That was a good date until he panicked, until he found out it wasn't really Kira.
Vic looks at Kira and says, don't say it, and then to himself says, computer, end program. And then Kira is left standing alone in the empty holosuite.
Looking shocked.
And we go into the ad break with a big sigh from Kira.
She looks amazing in this episode.
Oh, she does. She looks like $1 million Vegas bucks.
Yeah, she looks like $1 million bucks. Sweetheart. Quite a broad. And all the other stupid things.
Now on the promenade, Dax and Kira are doing their favorite pastime of talking about boys. And Dax asks, what's wrong? Kira talks about having a moment of total clarity, and Dax's advice is for her to act on it before it becomes clouded by confusion and doubt. She sees Odo and runs after him to catch up. Odo says, I'd like to forget all about last night. Kira tells him, no, they need to discuss it, and Odo says they can meet in his office. Kira tells him, no, they can discuss it over dinner. Anywhere but a holosuite. Odo brings up Shakar, and Kira tells him, what does that matter? They're just friends. There's a goofy rom-com inspired scene here, which ends up with Odo saying, and then you'll expect me to kiss you, to which Kira replies, then why don't you do it now? And they do. And it seems everybody on the promenade also pauses and watches. And I'm thinking, are they on duty?
Well, they don't say, but they could be.
Yeah.
And it seems completely counterintuitive that an introvert like Odo would be willing to kiss someone out in the open like that. For the first time, especially the love of his life.
People would be looking at him and knowing things.
Exactly.
He would not like that.
No.
And I think if you look, you can see Dax in the background making notes for her podcast. This is
Yeah,
now going to be an entire episode.
She's taking pictures.
Back to the holosuites, and Vic is finishing a set, and Odo comes up to see him. It seems things are going well with Kira and Odo, and he tells him that he doesn't know how long it will last, though. Vic replies, "That's my Odo, always ready to turn a victory into a defeat." Odo actually thanks Vic for all his help, but declines to sit in on another number. Vic asks Odo to keep the program running for a few minutes after he leaves because he likes to sing. And Vic begins singing Fly Me to the Moon as we close on an outside flyby of the station. The end. Is that your summary?
Well, do you have overanalysis? I only have like one question written in mine. Mm-hmm.
I really only have a few things. I mean, the first thing is, this holo program seems a little advanced. Isn't anybody worried about how dangerous it can be if it can transfer between holodecks, write new programs, modify the program, get into the comm system and talk to people?
Moriarty, anyone?
Yes, that's what I was thinking. Is this program becoming self-aware? When does it decide to take over the universe?
Right.
And it seems to have bypassed all the security codes.
I would be worried about it from a security point of view because it was hopping between programs and able to call out of it for absolute sure, because someone could then program it to do something nefarious.
Right.
So yes, that seems very dangerous. And it seems like Odo should be at least slightly concerned about that in his role.
Yeah, right.
But, he wasn't. And then on the other side of it is, I still don't think we should be going to him for advice about women.
Not if you have a 1960s sensibility.
So yeah, I have a lot of problems with that hologram.
Clearly.
And I like singing.
And I think the second thing is, they played this whole episode as if Kira had no idea about the feelings Odo has for her, which I think by this point should be pretty obvious. Children of time.
Right. Well, she should know, but he hasn't done anything, to Quark's point, in so long that she's kind of given up on it.
Is this because of negative gender roles and the fact that, it is possible for a woman to ask a guy out?
Yeah, that is another thing that I have a real problem with. If she wants something to happen, she is perfectly capable of initiating something as well.
For somebody as self-motivating as Kira, it does not
she
seem
wouldn't
very
be afraid
unlikely.
of that.
Yeah.
She wouldn't be afraid of that. But yeah, written by people who don't understand that women also have full agency over their romantic lives.
I think that is a valid observation. And that's really the only analysis I have on this episode.
Yeah, there's not a lot of analysis to do. If ever an episode needed a B story, I mean, it needed something else. Or this should have been the B story. Really, that would have made more sense. I'm not sure they had enough to make this the full episode that they did.
I'm not sure they even followed the characters enough to make this a full episode.
We used to do more A and B stories on this show, and, we haven't really done a lot of that since the Dominion War and the really serious episodes, but this is something really calling out to just be half of an episode.
Yeah.
So I understand why you don't have much analysis. I don't have much analysis either. The only thing I have in my overanalysis section is, what's a moment of clarity? Have you ever had one?
No.
That's the end of the overanalysis.
Okay.
I mean, I've had moments where I've thought, oh, this is what is going on.
Yeah.
So I assume that's what it was, but that was the only thing I found sort of intriguing here.
Yeah.
So there's just not much to analyze. So I don't have anything else either.
Okay.
So we should go to women in the future.
Yes, you should go to women in the future. I'm very interested.
I've already made all my points about it.
Yeah.
It doesn't make any sense that you're getting advice from someone who knows how to treat women in the 60s. It's a terrible idea. And nobody corrects him. You shouldn't be calling women dollface and sweetheart and whatever. I understand that some of the things that he said were fine and made sense in maybe all periods of time. But to assume that he's the expert on how to treat women it's insanity. And on top of that, to make a fake version of Kira without her permission and then to have Odo go on a date with her is terrible. And Odo should know that.
Yeah, and the only reason you ended up with the Kira hologram was because when the computer stored their images in there, when they had the transporter accident.
Yeah.
So it really was only in there because of an emergency situation. So I think unauthorized use of your image would be definitely a violation of privacy.
Yeah. And really, it should just be a basic rule on the station.
Yeah.
That you're not doing that.
Right.
So not a great future for women in this episode.
Yes, fast forward to the 1960s.
Right.
Do the writers think that's cute?
I'm afraid they do. I'm really, really afraid that they do. I mean, this is such a shallow episode.
Yeah.
And what I would say is that I like the outcome of it. Like, I like that finally, okay, we're over this hump that we were stuck in.
Yeah.
Where Odo just couldn't do anything to let Kira know that he was interested, and Kira wasn't doing anything, even though she could have as well.
Right.
I'm glad we're finally over that, because that has been dragging out for a long time.
Been so bad sitcom-y, though.
I agree, the way that it happened, I did not enjoy. But like I said, it's the outcome that I appreciate.
Yes.
But the episode itself, this should have happened in 10 minutes, and it shouldn't have been the focus of an entire episode. What a waste of 46 minutes.
And the way they did it, it's almost like, oh, I didn't know he cared. Really? He wiped out an entire race because an alternative timeline version of him was obsessed with you.
Yeah.
Or was racked with guilt over your death.
And I did a thing while watching this episode that I haven't done very frequently, if ever, while watching Deep Space Nine while we've been podcasting about it. I fast forwarded. I mean, it's one thing when I don't want to watch violent stuff. That's not because I don't want to know what's going on. It's just I don't like violence. I find it to be quite nauseating. But this was like, oy, fast forward. I don't need to hear Vic sing again. I like singing. That's really not my kind of singing. I don't feel like there's a lot of heart in it. So this is not our best work, shall we say.
It's kind of hard to disagree with that.
Well, then let's go to rating. Thumbs up, thumbs down, or neutral. What is your rating?
Wow, this is an absolutely firmly neutral. To steal your line, I liked the outcome.
Yeah.
Getting there was kind of like walking over sharp stones.
It wasn't terribly offensive. We've certainly had more offensive things happen on this show. It was a whole lot of nothing, and I did appreciate the outcome, so I guess I'll go neutral as well.
Yeah.
Although, as I was watching it, I suggested we skipped it, right? I told you I was willing to jump to the next episode because it just didn't seem like anything was happening. It just seemed kind of dumb.
Yeah.
But I guess I'll stick with neutral.
You did have the suggestion that the episode, we could start it up and you go, yeah, Odo and Kira gets together. Yeah, that's all you need to know.
The end. There's a guy who sings.
There's some guy who sings called Vic.
Well, does that wrap up and add to our data of people who keep poking me saying, we can tell when you don't like an episode because it's short. That's not our fault. And nothing happened. There's nothing to analyze. There's no story. Nothing happened in this episode.
Yeah, I mean, it's one of those things of, I also don't get the Odo being completely terrified or him being unable to act in this situation. And at the same time, I don't get Kira. It's something that I can't relate to.
I can understand people being afraid to act. I can.
Yeah.
And not all men or women have the confidence to step forward and ask somebody out when they like them. But at this point, it's not a secret anymore.
Right.
I got it when he didn't want to speak up when nobody knew.
Yes.
But Kira knows now. So what's the point now of avoiding it?
Yeah.
I mean, maybe he was still clinging to that conversation they had about, when the war started. Maybe it just wasn't the right time. And was he still clinging to that because the war is still going on?
Yeah.
I don't know.
Do you remember Dax's party where the two of them spent the whole night just talking?
What happened? Yeah, we never had any outcome from that. Yeah, I totally forgot about that. It was quite disappointing that we never went back to that and discussed it. And I didn't like the Shakar stuff here either. They were just using Shakar to have that fake jealousy stuff again.
Yeah.
And it's just like, ugh, God. It's all we know how to do. It's silly.
Yeah, it goes back to my comment of it feels like it's high school writing.
Yeah, I'm afraid so. I was listening to a podcast this morning that was talking about how in the 90s, and not just in the 90s, but the story was about a show in the 90s, and how the writers had to work really hard to make things palatable for all audiences, or it wouldn't air.
Yeah.
And so even if they were trying to touch on a difficult subject, they had to find a way to make it palatable for middle America. And so that's maybe mixed in here as well. But
Gotcha.
We've been more out there with stories on this show.
I think so.
Than this.
Yeah.
Yeah. Like the Rejoined episode, for example.
Yeah.
We made a pretty strong statement there.
Right. Have we complained enough about this?
It's just disappointing.
Yeah. It's that whiplash thing. We have episodes that are outstanding.
Yeah.
And then for some bizarre reason, we get episodes that you could drop into a bad sitcom or a Love Boat. It almost detracts from the whole show. It doesn't, because I still love it. But I feel that you're doing it a disservice.
And we got an email from Mike N., one of our frequent emailers recently, commenting on our use of the word whiplash and saying that was intentional. Like they were trying to not be super dark all the time.
Yeah.
Even if that was true, it's so extreme.
Right,
and it's constant.
Right.
Because now I've watched the next episode and we are going way off again into something super dramatic.
Yeah.
So the whiplash it's extreme.
Taking Mike's point, I wonder if some of this was being forced on them by the next level of management above, going, oh, you need to do a funny episode every 2 or 3. We need to do that. So if you like, it's the classic interference from a corporate going, oh, can you make it funny? Can you put a dog in this episode?
Yeah. I don't know. It seems possible.
Yeah.
Well, I think that wraps up season 6, episode 20.
Yes, we're going to take it now and bury it out in the desert.
Come back next week for episode 21 and your weekly whiplash.
Oh, yeah.
In the meantime, if you'd like to send us your own overanalysis of this, and again, if you have something to analyze, please feel free to send it. I made the same call after the Morin episode, and nobody sent me anything. So, if you've got something we're missing, I am more than happy to listen. So feel free to reach out. Anyway, if you have overanalysis of this or any episode, or if you just want to say something nice, you can email us at ReBingeIT@gmail.com or tweet us at ReBingeIT. We're also on Instagram and YouTube at ReBingeIT. You can check us out on TalkThroughMedia.com, where you can listen to the other podcasts in the network, and you can also leave feedback there. We're a part of a Patreon, patreon.com/Star Trek TTM, which benefits all of the podcasts in the Talk Through Media network.
Thanks for joining us on the Rebinge Deep Space Nine podcast.
That's it for me.
And that's it from me.